Got it.
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay. So I just wanted to give some context. I'm going to quickly repeat what I just said. Christen wants to know, there's a new thing on the blog called the English view component. It's a thing that we use in Rails. And Christen is asking for the business value of moving to it. And so I thought I'd give a little context of where we're coming from at GitLab and where we want to go, right? So we have a thing, basically when GitLab started, it uses a template language like it's called Haml, and basically it's just HTML. And when GitLab started, people were just adding bootstrap classes to things. If you have like a page, let's say the issues page and a merge request page, you add like headlines, and you add like badges and avatars based on bootstrap classes. This obviously grew over time, and we have hundreds of pages, and so it's really hard to enforce consistency. One way to reuse code is so-called Haml partials, which basically is often used in the older parts of the code base. For example, if we're talking about issue builds like merge requests and issues, certain aspects, let's say like the right-hand sidebar, might be reduced via a partial, or like other aspects like, for example, the notes where we write our comments. The comment section might be, code that's reused between a partial. That, still means that if in like dozens of partials, you have dozens of avatars, there's a lot of repetition there. One thing that's also there is a Rails helper, and a Rails helper is basically can be anything, right? You could have a helper that, I don't know, divides a number by 2, or you could have a helper that returns a little bit of HTML. So one of the ways how we were writing reusable things like avatars were Rails helpers. And so now we basically end up with like, we have like 3 ways to write things in the from the backend templating perspective, and there might be a lot of duplication, and the Rails helpers have the downside that they're not necessarily made for writing HTML, so testing them might be a little bit harder, for example. And there is this new cool technology called ViewComponent, and most of these 3 use cases might be able we might be able to migrate to them. So we can build Pajamas components, view components, the English view components that would be like avatar, or even larger sections like card or empty state and all these kind of things. And so it's beneficial for us to use them because we can actually, currently they're all inside of the GitLab project, but we could also move them outside of the GitLab project rather easily so that they could be reused across other projects.
Like documentation or something like
documentation, customers GitLab com, and so on and so on. And so basically these view components that we're now writing, if they wouldn't exist, we probably would write Rails helpers, to be honest, right? But the view components have a few benefits over them. You can read them up on the view components page that we probably link. I also don't have all the details in my head right now. But in the end, we will probably have a component library that is an implementation of our design system. Similar how we currently have, and now backtracking here a little bit, how we currently have an implementation already of our design system, or large parts of it, and that's GitLab UI, and that's using the French view. And the French view is the thing that we basically use for everything new, or for most new pages, for pages that behave a little bit more like single page applications, for pages that load a lot of things asynchronously. We're using it already since years, right? And so this,
if a team like if they convert their part of their feature over to Vue, or have a single page app, they can just use the normal Vue GitLab UI, which is the French view.
Yes.
Probably the ideal scenario if
Yes.
a lot of pages require Haml or Ruby or like these older
Yes.
different
So the biggest benefit that these English view components have and that all the Haml templates have over, let's say, the French view is that for static pages that don't have a lot of interactivity, they're usually rendered right away, right? And so the question is like for a lot of our legacy applications, migrating them all to the French view is a lot of effort. And so actually, if we just want to ensure consistency, for example, that all the settings, all the sections on all the settings pages are rendered the same, it's easier for us to move forward and move to an English view component. Or, if we want to make our forms more consistent, these English view components give a lot of benefits over partials and templates because they allow you to be more strict about how the developer is using it and thus enforcing consistency and also having a single source of truth where we can change things. Like if we, for example, in a form want to have like a loading state after someone hits a submit button, instead of fixing 80 submit buttons throughout the app, we can just do it in one place. And
that's what the view component in Haml.
yes, that's the English view component in Haml.
Whereas
So now one more thing, the
we had to
English view
update it.
component could, for more complex dynamic things, let's say for a dropdown, could probably, we haven't figured it out, but there will be and should be a way how we use the French view components so that we don't have a lot of duplication between these two implementations. Yeah.
So from a product manager perspective, if I don't have the roadmap, I don't have the time or the capacity to do the top option, which is migrate all of my features to using Vue and be single page. We have this alternate way where you can leave them in Haml.
Yeah.
There's 3 different ways of doing the Vue component inside a Haml template, partial, or with a Rails helper. And then that allows you to get the newest GitLab UI rendered within Haml.
Yes.
And then just, like I wanted you to go through too, just quickly, currently, where are we at in terms of these like component migrations with Haml? And why should we be excited about that as product managers for what we can do then with our UIs, like to keep moving forward on doing all of these component migrations? What are they getting us?
So basically these two, the English and the French view components, they are definitely Pajamas compliant. And moving forward, if we ever change something on the design system, we're going to fix them in a way that doesn't require a lot of, re-implementation yet again, or these kind of things, or if we actually make them, for example, more accessible, all these benefits will, propagate to all the pages that use them. And I mean, that's the main reason why we're moving to them, right? Like to ensure that we are more accessible and more consistent in our UIs. I mean, this is the big benefit because down the road, if you open any page of GitLab, it should feel and look like GitLab, right? If you open any dropdown, it should feel and look like the other dropdowns in a GitLab application so that users that have learned to use our application, can just use about any page and understand how it's working and that there are no quirks between different pages, which we have because right now a lot of our code is still fragmented between those 3 ways on how we do it.
Is one of those 3 ways better than the other? Or is it just case by case in terms of whether they would be migrating in a partial, in a template, or with a helper?
Theoretically, any of those 3 can be Pajamas compliant or can be written in the right way, but I kind of ordered them in the order how easy it is to make mistakes, right? The top one, it's very easy to have like, hey, at one point, these 40 avatars look the same, but they don't look the same anymore. to how you know, to make it to, you know, to have it a little bit easier, right? To have it so that it's easier to be compliant, right? And so basically, I think theoretically, the difference between a Rails helper and a view component is actually not that large from a, you know, high level perspective. It's just that this English view component makes it a lot easier. The developer experience is better, and it makes it a lot easier to test and other things. And so actually what we're sometimes doing when we already have a Rails helper in place, rather, you know, we actually just change the helper to use the view component under the hood. And so you don't have to go in and fix it in 80 places, right away.
So if I already had put the helper in, you would go in and put that in the include or something, like, so that the actual view component is there.
Yes. So for example, if we have a Rails helper for avatars, and we now have a view component for avatars that we want to use people have use in the future, that we want people to use in the future. The thing that we could do inside the existing helper, we can just, rather than, you know, the template that we have there, we can just use the view component under the hood.
Okay, cool.
This is also a thing that we can do inside of partials, right? Like this is like, if we have a partial, instead of replacing the whole partial, we can replace parts of the partial with the view component. And then every page using that partial will be improved a little bit.
So if we've done 500 migrations of a certain component, we've already used Rails helpers for that. The good news is we can just swap those helpers to pull in the new view component. And so in our GitLab UI French view, we've got every component there. Are we going to have this every component built out in the view component way as well? Like there'll be like one that's in the French, one in the English, and we'd keep them both up to date with new design changes.
So that's the
Pajamas side.
Yes, so that's actually the thing where we have the potential plan of pulling out these view components, so the English view components, so that they're reusable, and we might want to put them in the same repository as the French view component, so that we can ensure that if I have an avatar and I give it a picture, that the resulting, because it all results in HTML, that the resulting HTML looks the same. I would not say that it's necessary that we have every component as part of a view component, because like if you, let's for example say, what are highly complex components, like the filtered token search, right? Like the filtered token search that we have on the issues list pages and merge request list pages. Rather than having an English view implementation of that, we would probably urge the owners of those pages to go with the French view from the get-go, right? It's more, we're currently targeting more static components like avatars, labels, badges, you know, maybe some layout things like cards, or if you have column layouts, but we are currently not targeting. And, you know, this is where we also need to have a discussion in the future, like, does it make sense to have like an English view component that is a little wrapper around a French view component that is, for example, in dropdown, right? We are not there yet 100%, but, you know, we definitely should build a matrix also and a decision tree somehow, like when do we build an English view component? And I think the gut feeling right now is, if we look in the GitLab code base and see that in these three, we have dozens or hundreds of instances of something like an avatar or a badge, it makes sense to build like an English view component for it.
That makes a lot of sense. I know we're out of time here, so I should probably stop the recording.
Yes.